Okay, here we go. And at this point, I'm going to share my screen. So our topic this evening, the little horn of Daniel chapter 7. And let's jump right into it. Daniel has a vision in Daniel chapter 7. He says, "And after this I saw in night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible and strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with the feet of it. And it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns." Let's continue reading. It says, "I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things." So there are several things that we can look at when identifying the little horn. First of all, in Daniel chapter 7 and verse 7, the little horn comes out of the fourth beast. When you look at Daniel chapter 2, you would see that Daniel 2 talks about the head of gold, representing Babylon, the breasts and arms of silver, representing the Medes and Persians, the belly and thighs of brass, representing Greece, the legs of iron, representing Rome. And then in Daniel 2, it also talks about the feet of iron and clay, the 10 toes. Well, Daniel 7 goes over that same period, but this time it uses animals rather than a statue. And what is also unique about Daniel 7 is that in Daniel 7, God is discussing political kingdoms, nations, etc., and their political strength. And just a little tip in here, when we look at Daniel 7, you'll also notice in comparison that Daniel 8, which covers a similar period, all of the animals in Daniel 7 are basically carnivorous. The lion, the bear, the Daniel, start again. Lion, the bear, the ram. I think I must give me a second. My passages are going back. Let's go back into Daniel 7. First one was the lion. The second one was a bear. The third one, a leopard. Yes, these are all carnivorous animals. Then the fourth one, this nondescript beast. When we come to Daniel 8, we've covered that before. Daniel 8 uses animals that are non-carnivorous. They're all vegetarians, if you please, or at the most herbivores. It talks about a ram and a goat, which were animals used in the sanctuary because the focus has shifted from political nations and kings. The focus is now shifting to kingdoms and their role as it impacts the people of God and the very ministry of God's tabernacle, the religious aspect of God's people's life rather than just the political. So it's Daniel 7 deals more with the political. Daniel 8 covers more of the spiritual. But back to Daniel 7 then. So Daniel saw this fourth beast, which he could find no zoological description. And so he just described it. He says terrible, terrifying, dreadful, strong. He uses words such as that. If I were to look at the New King James Version, it says dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. The New Living Translation describes it this way: terrible, dreadful, very strong. It devoured and crushed its victims with huge iron teeth and trampled their remains beneath its feet. we know of no animal, past or present, that had iron teeth. And it says it was different from the other beasts and it had 10 horns. So we're seeing some differences now. The first beast, the lion of Daniel 7 and 4, had eagle's wings. The second beast, in verse 5, was a bear, 3 ribs in its mouth. The third beast, a leopard, it had 4 wings and 4 heads. The fourth beast, so there's a significant change here. The leopard had 4 wings, bird's wings, and 4 heads. But when we come down to the fourth beast, in verse 7, it says it had iron teeth and it had 10 horns. None of the other beasts that we see already make mention of horns in Daniel chapter 7. But this fourth beast has 10 horns on it. And I'm going to change my slides here. We now look. I considered verse 8, Daniel 7 and 8, the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn. And that's a little picture that I sent you, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots, and behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. So here we see this horn is different. It has a little horn. It plucks up 3 of the 10 horns on its way up. It has the eyes like the eyes of a man, representing intelligence, and a mouth speaking great things. When you look at this word, you're talking about great things. It's really speaking to blasphemy, as we will see later on. Let's go a little further. Verse 19 of chapter 7, Daniel says, then I would know the truth of the fourth beast, which was diverse or different from all the others, exceeding dreadful, whose teeth were of iron, his nails of brass. Notice how this beast is described, which devoured, break in pieces, and stamped the residue with its feet. And of the 10 horns that were in his head, and of the other which came up, and before whom 3 fell, and of that horn that had eyes and a mouth that spake very great things, whose look was more stout than his fellows. So if we're following the sequence of nations, we know the head in Daniel 2 represents Babylon. Which nations succeeded Babylon? The Medes and the Persians. They formed a joint alliance. The Medes were the ones, Darius the Mede was the one who conquered Babylon, but they also shared rulership, if you please, with the Persians. After that, you had the Greeks with Alexander the Great, who came in and conquered the Medes and Persians. So you had the lion who had 4 wings, represent the speed at which Babylon was conquering, which was replaced by the bear with the 3 ribs in its mouth, in order for them to succeed as a world power of that region. The Medes and Persians had to defeat 3 other kingdoms. Egypt was one of them. After the Medes and Persians, then you had the Greeks. And notice the leopard, who represents the Greeks, which represent Greeks, it describes it as being swift. And I'm going to go back to that passage and read it for you again. And we find that in verse 6, the leopard had 4 birds' wings, or the King James says, 4 wings of a bird. And the beast also, yes, had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. So things are getting strange. I missed that when I read it earlier. The beast has 4 heads. Some say this would represent the 4 generals of Alexander. We don't know, but that's how some persons see it. When Alexander the Great died, he had no successor, no son, and so his kingdom was eventually split up between the four of his generals. But then Greek was also conquered by the Romans, and that's why it was known as Iron Rome, because she crushed the revolt and anyone and everyone who got in her way. And notice the difference. Rome is seen as having 10 horns. And the 10 horns would represent the 10 nations who eventually broke off a piece of Rome. Just 1 minute. So here it is. Rome came up out after the Greeks, and she trampled during the time of Christ. One of the reasons why the gospel could go to the world is because of the Roman pax, the Roman peace. She brought peace across the empire. Any revolt would be quickly strangled, crushed, which paved the way for the gospel to go throughout the Roman Empire. But Rome gradually weakened over a period of time, and warring tribes, barbarian tribes came in and would break off a little piece of the kingdom. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. So let's look now. Daniel 7:23. When Daniel asked the meaning of these kingdoms, he was given this answer. It says, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon the earth, which shall be diverse or different from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth. When they said the whole earth, what they understood as the whole earth, and shall tread it down and break in pieces. And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise. So like I said, 10 kingdoms came out of the Roman Empire. And another shall arise after them. So the little horn arises out of the 10 kingdoms that came out of the Roman Empire. And he shall be diverse from the first, and he shall subdue 3 kings. And he shall speak great words against the Most High. Remember, the little horn had a mouth, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, referring to persecution, and think to change times and laws. And they shall be given into his hand until a time and times and the dividing of time. When Nebuchadnezzar was sent to eat grass in the field, it said it would happen until 7 times have passed over him, or 7 years. So in prophetic time, in prophetic literature, a time then would be a year, times 2 years, dividing of times half a time. But we would also understand that in Bible prophecy, a day is the equivalent of a year. And we understand this when we look at the prophet Ezekiel. Chapter 4 and verse 6, God told Ezekiel, and after that, turn over and lie on your right side for 40 days, 1 day for each year of Judah's sin. And so if a time is 1 year, times is 2 years, and half a times would be half of a year. When you calculate the entire thing, you come up with a certain time period, 1,260 days or 1,260 years. And let's continue. This is how long this persecuting power would have reigned on the earth. So who are the nations that came out of Rome? These were the old names. I know some of the modern names, but these were the 10 tribes. Each one just broke off a little chunk of the Roman Empire, and Rome was not able to hold them back. For example, Anglo-Saxons would represent the English, the Franks, the French, the Swedes, I think you pronounce that, would be the Swifts, some say. And then you have the Germans and the others who all came in, took off a piece of the Roman Empire, representing the 10 horns. But in order for the Roman Empire, for the little horn to gain prominence, she defeated 3 of these empires. And here we have it here. I should have broken this up a little bit for you, make it easier. So let me do that quickly for you. Okay, I think that's a little easier to see. So a time and the dividing of times, here translated, says it means a year. The word times translated also from Idian was pointed by the Masoretes, the people who translated the Old Testament in the Greek, as a plural, but scholars generally agree that it should have been pointed as a dual, thus denoting 2 times. So the word translated dividing may also be translated half, hence a more acceptable translation of the Revised Standard Version, a time, 2 times, and half a time. The 1260 years of papal misrule in the name of Christ may be represented by 3.5 years of open anti-Christianity and persecution before the millennium. So, and this is from Jamieson, Fausset, and Brown. This commentary was written back in the 1800s, early 1900s. I don't remember which denomination or whatever they belong to. They were not Seventh-day Adventists. So, but this was understood by persons of that era who were able to trace the history of what was happening in the world of Christianity or the world of religion. So for 1260 years, the church was persecuted. And I'll come back, well, let me do it before I forget it. From about 538 AD, when the last power, Arian power, these were Christian countries, so to speak, or tribes, who were fighting against each other, and the fight was over who was right in their doctrine. So here it is. Sorry about that sound. Let me see if I can mute that. Okay. So here it is. You have one said believed that Jesus was divine. He came on the earth as a human being. He was divine. The next one said that couldn't be. He was a good man, but he could not be both God and man at the same time. And so they went to war over it. Believe it or not, that is what was happening. They go to war because they have different doctrine. Can you imagine if that was happening today, the trouble we would be in? So here it is now, they're fighting against each other. Eventually, after the dust settled, there were roughly seven tribes who were dominant. And what happens? The church became so dominant because when the emperor of Rome moved his seat of authority from Rome to modern day Turkey, Constantinople, it left a vacuum. Who would manage the city of Rome? Who would rule? Naturally, the church, because the church was very strong at this point. And so the bishop who was in charge of the city of Rome, or the overseer, whatever you want to call him, he became a most powerful figure. And his brand of Christianity, because he had different strains, I would call it, and we see that as early as the New Testament church, where the Apostle John says that anyone who doesn't confess that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh, is the Antichrist. It was starting from way back then, differences of understanding about doctrine and teaching. Well, here it is. The Roman way of thinking about faith and everything was influencing the rest of Christianity, and the bishop became so powerful that eventually his brand, so to speak, of Christianity took over all of the others. And that's what's happening here. And that took place for some 1260 years, from 538 to 1798, until eventually during the French Revolution, which was not a Christian, so to speak, revolution. This was an atheistic, ungodly, some would say, revolution, where they decided that the church was too powerful. There were too many holy days, from where we get our word holiday. Like almost half of the year was filled with holy days when you couldn't do trade or anything of that nature. And so they brought it to an end. They felt, hey, this was an abuse. We can't manage any longer. And so the general came, Berthier, locked up the Pope and put him in prison. And none of our allies, Rome's allies, the church's allies, were able to actually stepped in rather to help her. And that's how that also enabled the Reformation to continue to go forward. The Bible could now be printed without being repressed, you being persecuted for owning a Bible. Bible society sprang up. They spread the gospel. The Reformation moved in leaps and bounds across the world. Let's jump now. I'm going into Daniel chapter 8, and I'm picking up, no, let me skip this for now. It's only gonna, okay, grounds and Medes and Persia. I've covered some of these. Okay, yes, I should be here. So you had in Daniel 8, remember I said you have sanctuary animals are being used because the focus shifts from political battles to spiritual battles. So this time we have a he-goat Daniel saw, which was coming with a notable horn between his eyes, talking about Alexander the Great. The horn was broken. Remember I said 4 of his generals came up and they divided his kingdom out of one of them. Now the question is, one of the horns or one of the 4 winds? Persons who study language and grammar would tell us that this little horn didn't come out of one of the 4 horns, but rather from one of the 4 winds of the compass. Because this little horn waxed exceeding great toward the south, the east, and toward the pleasant land. There's no general, no king, nobody who came out of the ruins of the Greek Empire when it was split up between 4 of Alexander's generals, who could say he waxed great across the region at that time. Look at what this little horn does. We're looking at identifying the little horn. And it waxed great even to the hosts of heaven. That did not happen. And it cast down some of the hosts and of the stars to the ground and trampled upon them. Some say that referred to Antiochus Epiphanes IV, or the madman. They call him the little man or the madman. He did not do that. And he magnified himself even to the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away. The place of his sanctuary was cast down. Those who believe that this was Antiochus Epiphanes IV say this was fulfilled when he stopped the Jews from sacrificing and placed a pig on their altar, sacrifice a pig on the altar. And you imagine how revolting that was. But he did not fulfill 1,260 years. That didn't happen. So it could not have been Antiochus. You have to look for another power who magnified himself to the prince of the host and who took away the daily sacrifice. So the ram which thou sawest having 2 horns are the kings of Medes and Persia, okay? And this is something I was going over. And that's what we're saying. The little horn is not something that came out of the Greek Empire, Media, Persia, Greek. So if them refers to winds, all difficulty vanishes. And that's the question is, what is the them that's being referred to, the winds or the horns? Rome doesn't fit it. And like I said, persons who study languages will tell you it would have to refer to one of the winds, talking about the antecedent. So from one of the 4 points of the compass would come another power. Rome came from the west. In the literal explanation of the symbols of the vision, Rome is said to arise in the latter time of their kingdom. That is the kingdom of the 4 horns. However, the verse refers only to the time when the little horn would arise and says nothing of the place of its rising. Whereas my verses disappeared, is concerned exclusively with this location. For some reason, the verses don't carry over when I copy them. So it is Rome who came out of the 10 kingdoms, as we saw in Daniel 7, by plucking up 3 Christian tribes, had one defeat the other. They fought among themselves, and then she influenced somebody else to defeat the 3rd one, and so it really left 7. That's how 3 were plucked up. And she emerged with a mouth speaking great things, very pompous. Let's look at something here, this little diagram. And they're saying here, this plane here, this plane here would represent the horizontal, this is the vertical. Here it is the horizontal vision, the ram, the he-goat, the little horn in Daniel 8, which is the same as the little horn in Daniel 7. In Daniel 7, it says it has a mouth speaking great things, eyes of the eyes of a man. And he would think to change times and laws. And Daniel 8 is more specific, magnified himself even against the prince of the host. Okay, so here, only Rome did this, and she did this by substituting a human, we would say, system of salvation in place of the one that was in heaven. And this took place for 1260 years when they came up with the Mass and when they came up with a system of works, when you're talking about penance and all these stuff. This was replacing or taking the focus from Christ and actually placing it on a human being, a priest, a man, an individual. And so she magnified even to the Prince of Hosts, casting him down from heaven, because she's like in the eyes of human beings replacing the sacrificial work that Christ was doing in the sanctuary. Remember, on earth, the sanctuary would have ceased. Its services in sanctuary ceased in AD 70 when the Romans sacked it and burnt it to the ground. So it could not be the earthly sanctuary that was being under attack, but rather the heavenly one. And this little horn power didn't come to being or come into its own until about 538, when the third power was destroyed, this third Arian power that had a dispute over the deity of Christ. That is when everything came into being. And it was at that time that she really began to grow in prominence. Of course, by then the church had been influenced by the world, so to speak. You had a lot of traditions and superstitions and everything coming in. Sunday sacredness is one of the things that came into the church, where the pagans who worship the S-U-N came into the church, and the Christian says we worship the S-O-N. And so, in order to also distinguish themselves from Jews, they started bringing the focus to the first day of the week, so everybody was happy. The Christians worship the Son of God, and the pagans who came into the church worshiped the S-U-N in the sky, because Christianity was now the emperor's religion. Constantine became a Christian, and so everybody now flocked to the church because this is the emperor's religion. You could no longer persecute Christians because this was the emperor's faith. And around 538 AD, this was when the little horn power really gained its prominence, and she was a dominant player. The brand of Christianity that was in Rome was the one that really spread throughout her empire. There were still pockets which did not accept it and believed it, but Roman Christianity was a dominant. So another way of looking at, C. Mervyn Maxwell says that the Church of Rome became the Roman Church, or the Christian Church, sorry, let me rephrase it. The Christian Church became the Roman Catholic Church, and she influenced so many others who came after her. And that's what we're saying here, contrasting a focus connection between heaven and earth. It says she would go against the Prince of Hosts. So Rome not only moved on a horizontal plane by plucking up three horns, she moved on a vertical plane by going against Christ and his work in the sanctuary, by substituting a human made means of salvation and sacrificial system as opposed to that of Christ. So we're saying the prophet has shown things that take place first on earth, then in heaven, and then back to earth again. And it's sometimes known as the vertical dimension of apocalyptic. So let me share the Bible with you so you can get a visual on it. So let's go back into Daniel. Okay. Oops. Let's pick up at verse 8. So the male goat became great. When he was strong, a large horn was broken, Alexander the Great. 4 notable ones came toward the 4 winds of heaven, his 4 generals. One of them, and the question is this one of the 4 horns or one of the 4 winds? They're saying that them would refer to winds or the directions from the compass, little horn which wax exceeding great toward the south, the east, and toward the glorious land, or that would be Palestine. Commentary says Israel nation. But notice then it shifts to a vertical dimension. It grew up to the hosts of heaven, cast down some of the hosts and the stars to the ground and trampled them. He even exalted himself as high as the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. And because of transgression, an army was given over to the horn to oppose the daily sacrifices, and he cast truth down to the ground. He did all this and prospered. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another one said to that same one who was speaking, how long will the vision be concerning the daily sacrifices, transgression of desolation, and giving of both the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot? And he said, for 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. Look at verse 23, explaining the power of the little horn. When the transgressors have reached their fullness, a king shall arise, having fair features, who understands sinister schemes. His power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. He shall destroy fearfully and shall prosper and thrive. He shall destroy the mighty and also the holy people. Rome really ruled, had an iron grip because she had such a strong influence on others, and that is what made the difference. The C. Mervyn Maxwell talks about in his book how when one of the kings dared to oppose the Pope, and the Pope told his subjects they no longer have to obey him, in order to regain his lost status and receive the favor of the Pope, he traveled to the castle where the Pope was staying, and says he stood outside barefooted for about 2 or 3 days in the snow until he was forgiven. So it shows you the power that she had over kings who dared to resist her. Through his cunning, he shall cause the seed to prosper under his rule. He shall exalt himself in his heart. He shall destroy many in their prosperity. He shall even rise against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken without human means. Okay, and so eventually, like I said, the little horn power it largely lost its dominion, its dominance rather. When the Pope was taken captive, put in prison, the power of the church was basically crushed. She lost her influence. The Reformation had already been chipping away gradually, slowly but surely. Rome was also losing a lot of her influence. So the church, the nation of Rome had given way to the Church of Rome. And so whereas she still had influence in many countries, and a lot of Europe would still consider themselves Catholics, even though they may darken the church when they're born, when they get married, and when they depart. So someone says they go to church when they hatch, match, and dispatch. They still consider themselves Catholic, so to speak. But here it is, eventually the power of Rome was broken after rising up against the Prince of Princes and the host. And notice this happened about 1798. 1844 was when Christ's ministry moved from the holy into the most holy place. And the focus was no longer on the priest, the man, the individual, but attention was redirected back to Christ when individuals discovered that Christ began the second phase of his ministry in 1844. Let's go back to our slides. So here we have another diagram. These were taken from the 7-volume on the books of Daniel and Revelation, Beast 1, Beast 2, Beast 3, Beast 4, which would be Rome. You have the little horn, you have heaven and earth, Ancient of Days and Judgment. Then you have Beast 4 again, The little horn is destroyed, as we saw, Son of Man in the kingdom. That's just another way of visualizing it to help you to understand what's happening, because in Daniel 7, it says he will rise up and persecute the saints of the Most High and think to change times and laws. And I did not cover that, but in changing times and laws, the horn claim, this power, persecuting power claim that it is able to change the very law of God, and says it did this by changing the day of worship from the seventh to the first day, and it shows it as a mark of its authority. And this is something I made mention of earlier. So the little horn reaches up to heaven to meddle in the affairs of your sanctuary there. Second vertical action of the little horn is another way of looking at it. The little horn exalted itself to the Prince of Hosts, exalted itself to the Prince of Hosts, take away from the prince, talking about his sanctuary, and says was cast down truth. The Tamid put under control of the little horn, truth cast down to the earth, practice and prospered. And they're just showing you another way of looking at the whole thing. Notice here A, B, B, C, which is the most important thing, the foundation place of the prince's sanctuary. I'll ask you to please take note of that diagram there. The little horn, the symbolic action of the little horn on earth has ramification which extends so far as to affect the work of that heavenly sanctuary. The ministry of the heavenly prince in that sanctuary is carried on for the salvation of humankind. That is the purpose of all ministration in the sanctuaries of God, whether earthly or heavenly. Thus, by virtue of the character of its activities, the little horn is seen as interfering with the work of salvation for mankind as it is carried on in the heavenly sanctuary. Hence the employment of the description of this kind of symbolic action. And I made mention of this earlier, should have been in an earlier slide. Talking with the persecuting power of the little horn, Cathari, Albigenses, suppression of the Protestants in the Netherlands, the shameful massacre of St. Bartholomew's Day, all come to mind, and the so-called Spanish Inquisition. The New Catholic Encyclopedia acknowledges that, judged by contemporary standards, the Inquisition, especially as it developed in Spain toward the close of the Middle Ages, can be classified only as one of the darker chapters in the history of the Church. And this was taken here from quoting the mark of the beast in symbolism on Revelation. That's where I got that quote from there. All that is just copywriting information. So again, in summary, you might say, how do we identify the little horn of Daniel 7 who created so much havoc? Arises among the 10 horns of the fourth beast, which we saw, indicating its arrival is after the division of the fourth power, so it couldn't have come out of Greek. 3 horns will be plucked up before it. Those 3 tribes, Christian tribes, has eyes like a man, talking with intelligence, has a mouth speaking great things against the Most High, blasphemy where a man makes himself God, persecutes the saints of the Most High, we've covered that briefly, has dominion, especially for a period of 3.5 times, or 3.5 years, a day for year, give you 1,260 years, attempts to change times and laws, which it sought to do when it substituted the first day of the week for the 7th day, will be destroyed finally through a decision of the divine court. God is one who brings everything crashing down, so to speak. And that's just a brief summary of what we're looking at with the little horn. There's a whole lot more, but it would exhaust the time of our study. And this one here, again, I got that verbatim from William Shea, unity of Daniel, symbolism, Daniel, blah, 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 blah. Okay, questions, comments on what I've covered thus far. By the way, we didn't cover this, but the little horn would regain its power. And when we look at something in Revelation, we will see that the deadly wound was healed and the world wandering after the beast. And so gradually, you will notice that the horn is regaining its power. You see it. It started with John Paul, and it has continued. You had Benedict, who was there for a short while. He didn't make a major impact. But Benedict's successor, Francis, is the one who is really reaching out to not only the religious world, but the, the political world, making alliances and everything. And so all of these to me signs that she's rebuilding, regaining her lost authority and dominion and her influence. Rome has a very small army, which is mainly there to guard the Pope, not a modern army with tanks or anything. But she gets her bidding done through political forces by nations, etc., convincing them to actually do that which she desires. And that's how she exercises influence. And one day the time will come when she will convince the nations of the world, however it will happen, we don't know, that we need a day of rest, whether it is to give the environment a break, as we saw during COVID. They showed you pictures of what happens during the lockdown. They could see the temperature drop in some countries and all the busyness and activity. And maybe they'll say, hey, let's give the earth a chance to breathe at least one day out of 7. Guess which one that's going to be? First day of the week. And that's how she left, because that is the mark of her authority, by convincing persons, by changing the very law of God. The 7th day is the sign of God's ownership, that he is creator and also that he is redeemer. That's what the 7th day signifies. The Lord, or Yahweh, made heaven and earth. It describes his territory, heaven and earth, that he made it, his office as creator. And it identifies his name wherever the word Lord is in all caps. That's where the divine name was. And so the 7th day, the 4th commandment, contains the very seal of God. What the church did is replace the seal of God, the 4th commandment, with the first day of worship, which was her sign of authority. And she is seeking to exercise that authority, and she's regaining her clout once again in order to control nations and governments. So any question or comment on what I've covered thus far? There's a lot I have not covered, but I try to keep the lesson to 45 minutes and give you time to ask questions, make comments, etc. Everything clear as mud then?
Pastor, was straightforward.
Okay. I will encourage you, if you are able to, it's an investment, but it's worth the investment to get that 7-volume commentary set. It's hard to get the print version right now because the Washington State, I think, is still in a lockdown, some sort of a lockdown. So nobody's at the Biblical Research Institute's, office. But you can get the ebook like me, whereby you can read it on your phone, your tablet, your computer, whatever. Okay. I'm trying to find if I pulled up this one. Okay, they allow you to purchase them separately. I wasn't aware of that. They've split the set. It's a 7-volume. This is it here. So apparently they let you split the set. Come on. And the passages are tagged so you can jump from one to the other, scripture references, etc. Okay, it's $60. 7-volume set was produced from the early 90s. Actually started from 86. I don't know how volume 1 was produced later, but anyway, you can see Symposium on Daniel, 70 Leviticus, Nature of Prophecy, issues in the book of Hebrews, Doctrine of the Sanctuary, Symposium on Revelation, Book 1, Symposium on Revelation, Book 2. And for some reason, Volume 1 was produced also in 1992. I guess they asked Shea to do something later on afterwards. So you can get the entire set. It's $60. It's a download. If you were interested in the physical books, you would have to go to this website here. There's a lot of good material that you can read up on under the material section, but it's a little slow right now. Here it is. $60, so the same price, but this is the physical box. Now, if they're back in office, they can ship it to you. Oh, volumes 2 to 7. And volume 1 is out of print, but you may download it free from our bookshop. So to get volume 1, it's a download because it's out of print. For some reason, they stopped printing it. So it's worth the investment, I think, in order to get it. It's quite a bit reading. It's not an easy read initially, but if you spend time with it, you begin to understand it, and it'll really open your eyes to see that what our pioneers understood with the little tools that they had is now being substantiated by modern academic research. So that is something, the beauty to me of this set here. It's very good. Let me share my screen with you. So it's a Daniel and Revelation committee series. If you're getting it from here, Daniel Revelation Committee Series or .com. On the Biblical Research website, Daniel Revelation 7-volume set. To give you an idea as to what some of it looks like, I'll share just, this is volume 7. Let's pull up the table of contents. Let's see if I can make this a little larger. The saints' end-time victory over the forces of evil, the church in conflict, overview, the conflict, the church in conflict, exegesis, the mark of the beast, Roman Catholicism in the United States, some questions answered, contextual approach to the 7 last plagues, Babylon, anti-Christian empire. This is volume 7 of the set. The 7 heads, do they represent Roman emperors? The 2 suppers, the millennium, New Jerusalem. One of the advantages of studying a set like this is that they expose you to what others believe. So you begin to see where others, so when you're talking with someone who doesn't believe what the Adventists believe about it, you have an idea and you can answer some of the objections that they will raise. And that's the advantage of getting a set like this, which is an academic set, as I made mention. Sabbath hymns in the 70s heavenly sanctuary. That should be interesting. Sanctuary and judgment. Remnant church in the spirit of prophecy. The modern papacy. This is pretty good. Claims and authority. You can find some of this information on the website, Adventist Biblical Research, under the materials. And he has updated it since this here. He has 2 parts. And then you have the appendix, Daniel Revelation, Final Report, Armageddon, History of Adventist Interpretation. It's not always been the same. When you look at this one here, Symposium on Daniel. I'm going to go to the table of contents and show you what that looks like. Introductory studies on Daniel, authorship, theology, the purpose of Daniel. When was it written? Some people say it was written long afterwards, that Daniel didn't write it. Was it one person who wrote it, or was it multiple? The arguments for and against it. establishing a date for the book of Daniel, historical linguistic issues, unity of Daniel. You'll find this quite interesting. Parallels between chapters 2 and 7, as I briefly described, chapters 7 and 8. Then you have chapters 8, 9, and 11, early development of the Antiochus Epiphanies. Seventh-day Adventists are almost alone. You may have one or two others, believing that the little horn of Daniel 7 relates to papal Rome. Most people say it relates to this Seleucian king who came out of the Greek Empire. And so you'll be able to understand where they're coming from and have a sensible discussion with them as to why you believe it is not Antiochus when just what everybody else says it is. And then we look at these sepia, the stone kingdom of Daniel 2, the heavenly sanctuary, the time of the end, the little horn pagan aspects, papal aspects, audition about the sanctuary. I think this deals with the word cleanse. This is a Hebrew word here. Translation of cut off, I think that's what this one deals with. Notice there's a whole section just dealing with one word. Spatial dimensions, like that graph I showed you in Daniel 8. Significance of the cultic language in Daniel 8, 9 to 14, where it talks using sanctuary language and some of the other words. It's significant as to why Daniel chose certain words in writing what he wrote. There's a significant behind it. And these volumes open up that sort of stuff for you. So, like I said, it's worth the investment to get it. I tell people we spend, I don't know about other places, but in Nassau, a minimum for a smartphone for about $137 or so to get yourself a phone. At a minimum around that figure. Well, guess what? In 3 to 4 years, you'll probably be buying another phone. I don't even remember when I purchased this set, and I still have it. That just gives you an idea. So thanks so much, and see you next week. Lord's willing. I don't have the topic as yet. I have several in mind, but I'll let you know.